performance.
There we go.
Performance. All right. Today, it's like our spectrum and per, or as Dave put it so nicely, performance. Live, we're going to explain the video that you may have watched if you knew where it was. Otherwise, it's being released tomorrow, or at the end of this video, we'll give you a hot link to it. But we're talking about spectrum today. Jason's with us again for the whole lighting series.
I've had the most questions on this topic of any of these topics.
That's good, because my very first slide is, oh man, this is over, I said you, but really it's over everyone's head. It isn't that hard, but you're going to have to put your thinking cap on just for a second. But it's important because the hobby needs a standard. So please come along for the ride. Like, do your best to follow along with what we're doing. Those of you that do get it, make a determination. You're like, hey, I believe what those guys believe, and start to share it. Because what we need is a standard in this hobby, because we have none right now. Spectrum Wild West, right? It's just every spectrum for its own.
And if you need to watch it twice, because I did.
Yeah, this is how we progress, not only the hobby, but this is also how we progress, making sure that the tools that are made for us are the ones that we want. So decide along the way here if you're like, you know what, that is what I want, and I think you will, because it's pretty well put together. All right, so in that spirit, how did we do our spectrum test? For those of you who don't know, this is the tool. It's a UPR tech spectrometer. It's pretty easy. You shoot the button, we snap it on an iPad, share it with you guys. That is the meter. For those of you that don't know, this is one of the tests that we actually do in air. Just to give you a reason why we do this one in air rather than underwater, this is 2 spectrum shots. One of them is in air and one of them is water. They are nearly identical with one thing. The red is just a little bit lower in water, right? So as you know, water filters out, water is a blue solution, and it filters out the red as you get deeper and deeper. So this is just 2 feet, and it's just a tiny bit of red, but you can imagine what happens in 30 feet of ocean water, and red's basically gone. But in this case, so we don't test in water because it would require a really expensive meter and a lot of other garbage to do, and the difference is so minuscule that we test in air in every case. Different than par. You actually asked about par earlier.
I did.
The difference between testing par in water is that the results are like catastrophically different.
Right.
Rewards laser beams, punishes big banks of light that coat and wrap the things in light. So this is kind of different. All right. And how do we do the test? So if you go and look, if you've seen any of the video yet, for those of you that knew where it was and snuck in and found it, it is basically every channel. So we go and we look for every single channel that the thing is able to produce, and then we'll also combine them all together at 100% and show you what the thing can produce on its own. But it doesn't stop right there. What we're really looking for is how is it going to support an animal, not just a bunch of spectrum charts. You're going to be able to look at these things and by the end of this episode and say, oh, I now know what I'm looking at for the very first time. All right. Okay. So what we're talking about ultimately is PER. And so PER is photosynthetically usable radiation, where PAR is photosynthetically active radiation. Right, and the difference here, this is like, by the way, this is like the first time I was ever introduced to it, I think it was with Senai many years ago.
Sure.
So the Senai actually has like a little, par per meter on it. It's not really a meter per se, but it kind of like tells you that this black line on a normal reef tank would follow, in the blue lines, and it kind of tell you have 61% light that's in the per usable range to a coral. All right, well, we'll get there in just a second. But this is the difference. PAR basically reads the entire spectrum basically the same. Under reports, depending on the meter, blue a little bit, but like with a better meter, it would actually read the blue well. This is PER. PER is reading like specific wavelengths of light where the corals are able to use that light much better than others. Like we know that corals don't use green and whatnot very well. All right. And this is, like, somebody made this comment on YouTube, actually. This is the best I've heard it. We elaborated on it a little bit. But they said, PAR is a count of how many Skittles you have, right? PER is a count of how many blue and purple ones you have.
This is how my brain works.
Okay.
This is how it clicks for me.
Yeah, so if you think about it that way, like, PAR is the entire spectrum of light. per would be these two rows right here. So that would mean like, man, we were grossly overcounting like the par in this case if it's full spectrum light.
Sure.
Right? And it makes sense because it like more or less goes that way. You know, you have red, orange, yellow, green. I think they made up a blue one here, and a purple skittle. It matches the color wavelengths of light. And so what we're really doing though is, again, like when you look at the per, we're not really all that concerned about green and blue. It's something you'll see why in just a second again. So you got to come along with for the ride. But what we're really doing with per is trying to measure the differences between all the different blues. Just saying you have blue, not good enough. And again, you're going to see in just a second why that is. But what we're talking about here is all the different shades of blue. You know, you have like your ultraviolet blues, you have your violet blues, you have your indigo, you have blue and light blue blues. So per is really kind of a count of how the makeup of the blues actually work within the imaginary skittles as well. So in our case, the way that we're going to count them is ultraviolet rands in that 380 to 400 nanometer wavelength. Now that's like ultraviolet A. It's like a specific type of A, and it actually goes beyond 380, but like we don't measure it beyond that. Violet, 400 to 430. You can see the little bars a little farther over. Indigo, a little farther over as well. Blue, a little farther over as well, and light blue, a little farther over as well. So we're going to measure all of these, and now manufacturers will call these things all different. Like, you know, many of them grossly abuse the word UV and like near UV and all these other words. They're all just kind of like marketing terms. And in this case, we've assigned actual wavelengths to all these things. We'll just call them what they are. But and we do that in the video as well, like the actual breakdown of all the different lights that you'll watch. We break it down in there. We don't call it whatever the manufacturer decides to call it. All right. So one of the things that's important to note is there's actually no such thing as a per meter. So everybody was like, hey, I wish I could get a per meter. So I shared with you earlier, why is there no per meter? Do you remember?
I don't.
Okay. The reason is because per is photosynthetically, but it could be a plant, right?
Right.
So like the optimized light for a tree is very different than a coral.
How do you read it, right? You'd have to have a meter that says euphilia.
Okay, on
which
top,
nobody's probably going to make.
A good point on the euphilia thing,
Right.
because it's not just coral either. It's coral that are different corals. You'd have to have optimized per for euphilia, for zoanthids, for everything, because they all probably have a different makeup of how they utilize energy, partially at least based on where they're found. Like a lot of zoanthids are like in tide pools and stuff, and they're exposed to a lot of red light and really intense light. The other ones, man, they might be 30, 40 feet down. Like, there's probably almost no red light there. They've optimized around something different. So per has to be more of a concept, and it will depend on the individual coral. But if you can understand the concept, you can actually apply it to whatever you want. So this is how we are going to measure it for the test, right? And this is important. The blue biology band is something that we developed here at BRS as important, and you're going to see why. And this is one of those things, again, where I'm going to ask you, like, hey, do you believe what we believe at the end of this? Because we need to develop a standard. No standard is way worse than nitpicking and edge cases on, you know, an existing standard. So let's decide whether or not this could be the one. But in this case, what we have is a big, huge biology band. Like if your light has a lot of blue within this range, it's probably a really good light for a growing coral. If it's really narrow, it's probably less so. And this is a good example. So like that blue band range from like a violet color of 410 all the way to 448, which is in the light, 484, which is in the light blue range. This one here is just way, way, way less light covering than this one. And I think that maybe anybody that knows anyway, 100 out of 100 coral reefers would say, I want that one versus that one, if like price and all the other stuff wasn't.
Oh yeah, every time.
Yeah, I mean, even before watching this episode, if I showed you these two, which one would you want?
Yeah, why not more?
Yeah.
More is better.
So one of the things that you're going to have to see in all of this is, you know, when people are having this conversation, they're rarely having a conversation about what's adequate. They're having a conversation about what's best.
Yep.
Right? Adequate is just a different thing, and adequate is just a way, way, way lower standard. So best, though, most people are going to believe fills that band. Here's some of the reasons why. So when we optimize the spectrum for all of for building a light or for using a light, we're optimizing for three things. We're optimizing for chlorophyll A, C2, and carotenoids, which is predominantly pyridinogen. And the reason for that is that's the pigments that absorb all of the radiation and pass it on, that energy, onto the zooxanthellae, which in turn creates glucose and glycerol as energy for the coral, right? Okay, well, if you look at this, this is an example of where chlorophyll A absorbs light the most efficiently. So that's what you're looking at here. Chlorophyll A, where does it get light? Well, it sure doesn't seem like it utilizes green a whole lot, right? It does use a little bit, but you'd probably, to get the same, like par-wise, we could raise this up and it would measure as par, right? And we'd read it on our meter and we'd say we have 350 par, but we don't have the light that's like optimized for the animal.
Sure.
So if we'd have to probably raise this thing up 20 times as high, man, or maybe even more, green, to be able to get the same effect as nailing it right here. So nailing it right here means right about 410 to 430 is a sweet spot for chlorophyll A, where you're hitting both the primary and secondary shoulder peak of the blue end of chlorophyll A, right? So right in here, man, is a band where it uses light really, really, really efficiently. But if you're off by just a little bit, man, all of a sudden you're hitting down here and you're just not using light very efficiently. And even when you get down into the like UV or near UV, it's just less efficient, half as efficient. So if we're going to optimize per usable light for the animal, which is the intended use of this light, where would you put the light?
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's easy.
Bam.
Yeah.
Right here.
Along with the whole chunk.
Yeah. Would you put it here?
No.
No. Never. Nobody would do that. Okay. So this is kind of a couple examples of some of the lights in the test that did it pretty well. The MaxSpec Razor, they have a violet and near UV channel that, near UV, and it hits right here in the chlorophyll A, fills up most of this range. Now it doesn't hit this exactly, and the point of the matter is it doesn't have to look like this shape to be exact. It just means we have to provide a lot of energy in this zone where it is most efficient.
To me, this looks really good.
Yeah, I mean, somebody might nitpick like, hey, oh man, I missed this point like right here. But man, did it fill up all the rest. And I gotta tell you, there's a whole bunch of lights that really only hit like this little teeny bit of sliver right on the corner, right? Mm-hmm. They just go like right there. And if I was gonna weigh a light like that hits a corner right here or all of this, which one you pick?
Oh, all of it, every time.
Yeah, best?
Well, now that I know.
Best?
Oh,
maybe adequate, right? Okay, same thing here. This was the MaxSpec Jump, which is their newer light. Same thing. Now the light shifted over a little bit, and it isn't hitting every last space the same way over here, just missing a little bit of a different area. But there's a lot of energy that chlorophyll A can utilize. And so you see this a lot when we're talking about it in the videos is like, hey man, it covers a significant amount of this area, it covers a moderate amount of this area, or minimal. Sure. We're not really looking for it to like follow this shape. It's just like in that area, man, it has a lot of representation, right? Okay, chlorophyll C2, same thing. So chlorophyll C2 has a peak where it's really, really efficient at collecting energy. Less so right over here, less so right over here. So let's optimize for that peak. Good news, this one, everyone hits. 100 out of 100 you guys hit. And the reason is what are two LED channels that almost every light out there has?
Cool white, royal blue.
Boom. Every single light out there has cool white and royal blue. So this is a pretty good example of like Kessel. They don't really give you the option to like monkey with a lot of the channels, and most of them are tied down to their logic. And that's for that reason it's super wide right here. But like, man, they've missed just like a tiny, tiny sliver at the top, man. Like nothing burger all the way, right? But this is more typical. The GHL Mitris 7206. This is like your typical royal blue channel, right? Okay. So a lot of lights out. Almost every light that doesn't either has it or has it mixed into some other channel. It's one of the more affordable LEDs as well, so that's one of the reasons you see it in all of them. But you're just never ever going to see a light that grossly misses C2. You don't really need to worry about it. This one is the, by the way, we missed the part about the accessory pigment and what this actually does.
Oh, yeah, you must, because I didn't understand it at all.
Okay, so there's some debate over whether or not like chlorophyll C2 like is able to create its own energy for the coral, or whether or not its primary role is actually just as an accessory pigment. Meaning chlorophyll C2 is a little farther over than chlorophyll A. You know, chlorophyll A was a little over here. Chlorophyll C2 is farther over. It's actually capturing energy that would not be that efficient for chlorophyll A, capturing it in the C2, and then as an accessory, passes it back over to A, right? So basically the C2's existence is an accessory, is being able to expand the usable blue range, you know, that is available to the animal. All right, same thing with the perdininin. So in that case, the big addition here is actually this blue, light blue band over here, because more or less, if you hit A and C2, you hit the rest of this as well.
Sure,
right?
sure.
So it's this light blue band over here. Now we further expanded the area that the animal can collect light. And with perdininin, actually there's a thing called PCP compounds, which I always butcher, but it is perdininin chlorophyll proteins.
Okay.
They actually combine together to collect light over a really wide area and produce energy for the coral. So now what we've done is, let me go back here, 1, 3. So what we've done here is this first peak, about 390. That's the beginning of our wide blue band. Then for the perdininin, it's 384. That's the end of our wide blue band. So what we've done is created a zone that captures the peaks of the three things that gather energy for the animal, right? Okay, I feel like we're doing better than shooting from the hip all of a sudden. The Wild West is starting to go away.
Yeah, I mean, when I'm shopping, whether it's like T5 show you spectrum graphs, LEDs, it doesn't really matter the light source. And you would look at the graphs, I couldn't tell you what they meant before then, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like I could tell you, oh, there's a spike in blue, I need that, somewhere around 420, right? Everyone says 420 nanometers.
Mm-hmm.
But now I know, basically I'm looking to fill this entire chunk.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I'll tell you what, we're doing a video next week too, and Dave and I have been working on it all day, actually this whole week, how all this translates into color for your corals as well. That one is going to be mind-breaking, because you wouldn't believe how different each one of these colors represents in the coral. All right, so the perdininin shoulder usually looks like one of two things. There's some of them that fill almost the whole thing here, like the Hydra here did that, and then more common like the ATI stratin, it's about 50%. So this is really, really common. You'll see is about half of the perdininin area is filled with light. This blue here, by the way, you'll see it in next week's episode, is responsible for a lot of the orange fluorescence in your coral. So
Okay.
like, it's one of the reasons when you add it, all of a sudden some of the things in the tank just come to life, right? But it also provides life and energy. Okay, so that is the thesis for the wide blue band, and why that if we work for perdininin, chlorophyll C2, and chlorophyll A, we create this big wide blue band, which lights like this will perform really well at, and then this one I would just call adequate. And part of the reason I call it adequate is because at 450, we've actually completely missed the chlorophyll A, zone, right? And that's kind of mind-boggling, man. That like now we're almost totally dependent on chlorophyll C passing energy to A.
So in this case, then, I would need much more PAR, right, to offset that?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Okay. This is actually one of the things that, like over at Worldwide, they've told us that, corals are amazingly adaptive creatures. Vic would say that.
Sure.
Okay. The reality is they are if you just leave it alone. And this is one of the reasons why if you don't like start monkeying with all of your sliders all the time, just set it up right and leave it alone. Is this coral, like if I took a coral and I put it under this light, probably not all, but a vast majority of them would somehow adjust the ratios of perdininin, C2, and A to be able to collect the light that is available to it to survive, right? And so it's going to put a lot of energy, probably, presumably, into creating more C2 pigments, right? And it may take longer than you think to do that. And then if I decide now, like, oh, so switch it all up, well, all of a sudden now it has to readjust to that as well. So it's like you got to think about it a little bit deeper than when I change the lights, man, I'm doing something way, way more to the biology than you might think. Okay, so for me, always big blue band, right in that range of 410 to 484. Okay, I also got to tell you, this happens to be where some of the most historically successful light sources of all time also hits. So you'll see this peak right here. This thing is nailing the peak of chlorophyll A. It's filling out this wide blue band. It's got a little bit missing from the perdinatin area, but like, dude, this thing absolutely has produced probably the most successful, especially the one thing about I say successful, plug and play. Put it in the wall, man, and it just works.
Right.
You don't have to worry about spectrum.
Well, last week at almost any height.
Yeah, and just for your reference point, on the 8 bulbs here, this would be 2 coral plus, 4 blue plus, and 2 actinics, right?
Okay.
And so it's getting just a little bit in there, and this is the mix that when we put it all together, we did a whole experiment on it like a while back. So,
Okay.
all right. So I will also say this wide blue band, personal experience, and we all give advice and counsel based on our own experience. Mm-hmm. It's where I've seen the most success with all of our tanks, the 160, the 750 XL, the E170, your tank, all of these tanks, all not based on the Eiffel Tower,
right?
Based on a wide blue band. Okay. All right, so that's the case that we made for that 410 to 484. You guys got to chime in and decide like, hey, that makes a lot of sense to me. I think that the hobby should adopt this and support it. We've certainly used it for all the lights that you're going to see tomorrow, or if you find the sneak peek, you can see it today. But if not, if you're like, no, man, you got it totally wrong, chime in, say why. Say how it could be better, because no answer is so much worse right now than having an answer.
That's a good point. I mean, like I said, I watched the video and I had to come and ask you questions.
Yeah, I did. It's really complex, and it's got to be digestible. I can't expect everybody out there to come watch all of this and try to absorb it.
Right.
It has to be something that you can recommend to somebody, man. If it has a wide blue band between here and there, it's going to support coral really well. We'll get back to the plug and play, plug it in the wall, and it just works. That has to be the goal for the masses. Right? And if the thought leaders out there adopt that as the standard, all the manufacturers will start building towards it. As long as we don't care and you can just sell us an Eiffel Tower, they'll sell us an Eiffel Tower.
That's a good point.
Okay. All right. So big question here. Why no red? Because if you look at this, chlorophyll A has a big giant peak where it can absorb red. And even chlorophyll C2, a little bit of the orange area. Why no red? Okay. There's a pretty distinct reason why. We share with you each light that has red and where it's at, and you can make your own determinations. But there's a few reasons why we don't do it. One is you saw opening up, the red light gets filtered out of the water. So even in our tank, of 2 feet of water, we lost I don't know, it didn't look like that much, but percentage-wise, probably 20% of the red.
I'd say about there.
Okay, what does it lose in 10 feet? What does it lose in 30 feet? Where a lot of these corals are collected in that zone. Right. So we don't really believe that there's a whole lot of red available to these corals in the wild. Even though that peak is required. Okay. There's also no red in a lot of other successful approaches. So this is like the blue plus bulb. Like there's people that run awesome SPS tanks on 100% blue
8
plus
blue
bulb.
plus bulbs.
Yep. No red, man. Certainly isn't required for success. And I'm not even going to say like the coral had to adapt to that, because the blue plus is one of those things where you put it in, the corals just go.
Sure.
Right? They don't have to really adapt to anything. They just go.
Right.
Like where some people, if you did it wrong, it'll take 2 years. Some of these people will be the same place in 8 months.
Right.
Okay. Another reason is red may actually inhibit photosynthesis. Right?
Okay.
So there's been some experiments. I wouldn't say any of them are to the point that we would say they are fact yet, but there are people out there that found it in multiple different ways. One of the experiments I saw was the existence of red slows down the rate of photosynthesis. And the theory that scientist made was that the corals may actually utilize red to figure out how intense the sun is, right?
Interesting.
Because the more red that's available, the closer it is to the surface, and probably also where it is in the day. You
Okay.
know, it's going to get exposed to more red light, and it actually intentionally slows down photosynthesis. That's a theory, but I've also seen other ones that were the same. You know, a lot of people have theorized for different reasons that red may actually inhibit photosynthesis. Now, that doesn't mean that it does. It doesn't mean you should run out and believe that. But it's part of why we didn't weight red as like an importance factor when shopping for a light. It doesn't really seem to be necessary, and it may not actually be helpful.
Well, in realistic use case, if I'm trying to hit that, right, if I crank the reds up on my LED light on my tank, it does not look good.
Okay.
So I don't care how useful the red is.
Okay, put your mind-blowing cap on, right?
Sure.
This
Okay.
one is most people wouldn't think of this.
Okay.
Right? Also, the coral is capable of creating its own red. It's called fluorescence. So it
Okay.
actually absorbs blue light. Like you see it all the time in your corals. You shine like your royal blues on it, it pops out green, pops out red,
Sure.
pops out orange, whatever. So it's absorbing high energy blue light and then re-emitting it back out as a higher energy, lower energy red and orange and other colors, right?
Okay.
So it only needs like a little bit because there isn't that much red light, no matter how you cut it, you know, going into the ocean, especially at deeper levels. So it only needs a little bit, but actually can create its own through a chain of fluorescence.
Interesting.
Okay, so this is the mind blower, right? And this is one I'd love to do in a BRStv Investigates. I'm still collecting information about. Okay, so one of the theories is, I mean, have you ever heard that actinic lights caused the coral to create more fluorescence?
Oh yeah, of course. I mean, I would run multiple actinic bulbs in my T5 fixture on the tank that we showed a couple weeks ago.
Okay.
In an attempt to get that.
Okay, so I always called, like in my own mind, BS. The only thing that's happening is you're using a light that happens to fluoresce those things better than the lights that don't. It's not actually creating them. I might have to eat my words on this one.
Okay.
Right? I don't share those words very often because I'm not confident in them, but like if we were sitting down having a beer, that's what I would probably tell you.
Sure.
Okay, I was told the other day that the reason that it works that way is because the coral actually needs the other wavelengths beyond just blue, right? And so in the event that you take away the reds and the yellows and the oranges and the colored greens and the colors that are available, you know, under the sun, the coral will create more fluorescent proteins on its own to adapt to that environment and create its own spectrum light that it can re-emit and reabsorb itself.
Okay, so I would have switched out like a Coral Plus for an actinic bulb in a T5 scenario.
Okay, if that's true, man, that would be mind-boggling, man. Okay, that is one of the coolest things I would learn all year if we could do this experiment and find out that to be true. That the reason that the bluer light creates more fluorescence and more fluorescent proteins, which all of us would like. All of us like that coral that just pops in the tank, right?
All of them, right.
Yeah, okay. Is the absence of the other spectrums is what creates that. And then the next, if that's true, how do we use that information for the next level? Okay, why no UV? This is another question. So UV, you know, generally is UVA in our hobby, which is like 380 to 400, super heavily marketed. Everybody wants to have more UV in their lights and, you know, I don't know, whatever. The reason that we don't prioritize that within the blue band as well is because there's no scientific consensus as to whether or not, you know, that is like required for success. It's an area where, yeah, man, chlorophyll C2 and chlorophyll A can absorb light, they just do it less efficiently. So is there something about that range that will actually help it in some way? We do know that it will help, it will change some of the coral's colors. So I think there's a video called like Help My Corals Are Changing Colors or something from Dana Riddle.
Okay.
And you'll, especially like brains, they'll change from red to green or green to red depending on the amount of UV. Okay, well it sounds cool that you could change the color of the coral that way and then it will actually adapt based on the existence of the UV, but like what if you actually preferred red than green? Then it's not good.
True.
So it's not necessarily good in all cases. So we don't actually prioritize the UV just because there's no consensus on it. There's no hobby consensus. I haven't heard like, you know, overwhelming consensus from hobbyists or even farms that like, oh, look what UV does for us.
Sure.
There's also no UV in the successful approaches of the Blue Plus, you know, 380 to 400 doesn't exist. Doesn't seem to be required for plug and play instant success. And to be frank, man, I think that the UVA is currently more of a revenue driver than a biology driver.
Okay.
It probably sells lights really well.
Sure.
Yeah. That doesn't mean that it's not. We may find out in the future that UV is like one of the most important things ever. We want to dump it on there. I would suspect if you use too much, you'll actually cause bleaching from that super high energy light. But we may find out more. But as we know today, I don't think that there's any reason to prioritize that over other things. I might want a light that's capable of it, so I have that option in the future.
Right.
But I wouldn't feel like if I bought a light that didn't have that, like, oh man, I got a crummy light.
Well, see, and I would have looked at it like, oh, I really got to have the UV. But now, looking at this, so as far as what we know, this is what I'm going for now.
And plus some. You can
Right.
go for bonus if you want.
Right.
But don't feel like it's absolutely required. Okay. All right. So one of the interesting things here is when we go through this, and this was mind-boggling to me after I went through it all, and I was really, really trying to dissect, why do we hit certain different peaks? Why do historical lights hit different certain peaks? One of the things is, I would say at least half of the lights all peak in the chlorophyll C2 range, right? Now, I told you earlier the chlorophyll A is the thing that the corals can't live without, and the chlorophyll C2 is actually an accessory pigment that may have its own ability to absorb and process energy, but also it passes energy back to chlorophyll A.
Right.
Why prioritize C2 then? Like with these royal blue and cool white and 450 peaks, why does like almost every light peak at 450 instead of that 410 to 430 range? Okay.
I thought you were going to ask me. I don't know.
I know. The answer is disappointing to some degree.
Okay.
The answer is because royal blue and cool white LEDs are the cheapest. That's why. It's the easiest way to buy par. And in a world where par wars was happening,
Sure.
right? This is why it's so important for us to develop a standard here, is because they're building to how people test these lights and what the community talks about. Mm-hmm. And so if you build it as more par is better in par wars, then they're going to build it that way, and they're going to build it cost efficiently to achieve that.
Right.
Now, it's not just being cheap, because not all that long ago, the violet and near UV LEDs, those things were 10 times as much as a royal blue. So if they really filled it up that way, man, it would be really, really expensive.
Sure.
Today they're not. There's not that big of a disparity. But if you look at the AI blade,
mm-hmm.
if you look at the grow versus the glow, well, the glow has way more of those violet LEDs in it, and so it just costs them more.
Right.
And the grow is largely based on royal blue and cool white, which is one of the cheapest ways to provide energy, to the coral.
That makes sense.
All right. So that is the reason. So one of the things, though, is we have to decide, is that what we want going forward as a hobby? What are we going to buy? And the reality is all the manufacturers are going to buy what is you want them to make.
Sure.
As long as we're okay with this is what they'll make. Okay. This is where it kind of ties into, remember when we were doing price per par?
I do.
Okay. So I had mentioned Kessels back in the day. This seems like a lifetime ago. But we were doing price per par, which is the total amount of par divided by the dollars and how much it costs. And we found that the glow was like $1.87, and we found the Kessels are like $3.50 or something, almost double.
Sure.
Right? And I said back then, it doesn't mean that those lights are trying to gouge your wallet.
Yep.
Right? It could mean something different than that. And there's a lot of different ways to measure value. Horsepower is one, and that was what we were measuring. But if you look at this one, and this one would be in the Kessel actually, is this super wide blue band, and then there's this other one, which is one of the lower cost options on the Matrix. Would you pay more for this one?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. And from a per range of hey, I'm providing energy to, not just C2, but the whole breadth of pigments that are providing energy to this coral, is it worth twice as much? is it providing twice as much energy? Is it doing its job twice as good?
So it would appear it is providing twice as much usable energy and also less energy from your home.
Okay, my own personal experience is the lights that look like this take longer to achieve your results.
Okay.
The lights that look like this, you turn them on and it just works.
And I'm impatient, so then after you say that, yes, I'll pay that gladly.
Okay, so that's kind of the point is like, hey, I may not have that money. An adequate might be the thing that I'm shooting for, and I'll add on. You know, they sell all these like, you know, now they got the blades and whatever you can add on, but
Sure.
before that was XHOs and stuff. You could add on later, and I could go from good to great to best as along the way. Okay. Okay, there's another thing. It's called ratios here. All right, so this one is going to be really kind of hard to wrap your mind around, I guess. But like these things are not definitive numbers; they're ratios, and so like they change. You know, they are basically there is twice as much royal blue as there is light blue, as there is indigo, and there's probably 5 times as much of royal blue as there is like near UV-ish deep violet, right? Okay. So this light, however, looks different. Like here down the violet, man, I'm pretty close here, you know, and I'm not actually that far away from here either. And the blue is actually now, instead of being way down here, it's matched up here. Here's the thing. This is the same light. The only thing that we did in this case is we turned down the royal blues down to 50%, and now it's all in balance with each other.
You could have tricked me and said which light, and I would have chosen that one. So.
Yeah, exactly. If I asked everybody which one of these 2 lights do you want,
Right.
You'd pick this one. And so why does this one look this way? Well, one of the reasons is that 450 tends to bring out some fluorescence in a lot of corals. Not all of them, but some of them where it just pops it. And that's why you see people adding those XHO strips and stuff to their lights to get additional pop out of them.
Okay.
Because peaking that one spectrum sometimes looks best. But what it's really about is, do I have a big thick spectrum towards the bottom? If I do, that means I have all of those lights. I just happen to elevate one of them more than the others, right?
Got it.
All right. So that's why we actually broke it down. And so when you go and look at all the lights in this episode, you can actually see every single peak. You know, you can see the deep violet, the indigo, the blue, and the light blue, and the cool white, and the warm white, and the red, and the greens. And then we'll also show you how they all blend together. But you have to understand that you can actually, you know, blend these things together if you have the little switches to be able to do it, and the knowledge to do it in a way that actually makes sense.
That's the key.
Yeah. So this is the thing, though. Like some people would say, well, like, why don't I turn my royal blues down, right? Well, you can't really do that with a lot of lights, because a lot of the lights, if you turn down the royal blues or the cool whites or whatever down significantly, well, now I'm going to lose so much power that I can't use it to its intended application. Some of them, though, out there are, you know, what would look like grossly overpowered to the application. But what you're really getting or buying with that light is capability. The capability to be able to turn down the lights, use it intelligently to build on biology, but then next week we'll show you how to actually get the best coloration out of the corals as well, and we'll change it to be able to hit biology for the animal and coloration for us as well.
Next week is my week. Layman's terms. Show me how to make my tank look good.
Okay, and this time we went out and we spent like days shooting actual corals and a bunch of different lights. You actually get to see, you know, how much different each one of them is. Okay. It'll be a big, big difference. All right. So if you're wondering where this episode is and where the dozens of different lights and all the spectrums, and can you go find that wide blue band, can you find a little narrow one, or what do all the different channels do? All you gotta do is go to the playlist, find the Reef Tank Lighting Showdown, and it's hidden here down at the end. Or you can wait till tomorrow where it's publicly released, but if you want a sneak peek at it right now, that's where it is. Tomorrow though, the tested PER and the quality of light coming at you tomorrow. And next week, it is going to be the color of light and how do we use color to get the best possible color and fluorescence out of the corals.
And I'll be here next week.
All right, see you guys then.